and thank our leaders for the words and the spirit and the energy and the creativity that they bring into this room, into this space, because space is something that I really want to focus on today. I also want to have this out there. When we were thinking about how to frame what are the containers that can hold all of these different stories that you'll hear today. Radical to me, radical means at the root. It means at the root. What's at the core? What's the support system? Oh, okay. So I want to welcome all of us, everyone, to this space. I want to welcome all the pieces of you to this space. The Academy was not designed with most of the folks in this room to succeed. We inherited a colonial structure and a colonial hierarchy. So every time we step into a classroom on a commuter campus, we are taught to shed a little piece of ourselves. So when we think about our students coming into the classroom, think about the pieces that you want to invite into the classroom, right? So I invite all of us, I welcome all pieces of us into our space today. And thank you for joining us. Thank you. So I want to start with our land acknowledgement. This is something that's on the CRC website. I'm not going to read it to you, but the reason we do this is because it's an opportunity to pause and breathe and think and honor that we are on someone else's land and that our Native community members are still here. And we recognize their deep relationship with the land. We also recognize that this land is currently on fire. Literally, we are on fire. And so we stand with our Native brothers and sisters and siblings in solidarity to at least bear witness and be present to the intersecting environmental crises that we inherited as a result of settler colonialism, racial capitalism, and land theft. All of the presentations you'll hear today are grounded in our cohort's experiences attending conferences that center the experiences of populations represented in ethnic studies. Populations who continue to be impacted by settler colonialism, racial capitalism, and who are also living with fire. The second reason we acknowledge the land is to think about what it truly means to be in right relationship. Right meaning reciprocal, right meaning principled, not transactional or extractive. What does it mean to be in right relationship with the spaces we occupy and the people we work with? I want to move into sort of my guiding principle for leading, co-facilitating, being in the presence of this wonderful group of people. I will read this quote to you because I love it so much. The primary unit of life of striped dolphins is school. What if school was the scale at which we could care for each other and move together? I'm wondering if we could practice school as a unit of care where we are learning and relearning how to honor each other, how to go deep, how to take turns, how to find nourishing light again and again. Come talk to me about this book. I will talk for days. I love this book. Some of the key words that I want to pull out. are care, moving together, taking turns, and nourishing and relearning, moving deep. These are some of the principles that I've tried to mobilize in our group, with our group, alongside our group. I want to share a little bit about the origins of our collective. I overnight rebranded our cohort as a collective now. um, because that's what we are. We are an assembly, right? And sometimes I think about Avengers assembling. This grant came from the California Community College Chancellor's Office to all community colleges across the state. The idea for the professional development cohort was me coming to Dr. Bush's office and being like, so we have this money and we have to spend it, and I don't know what to do because I'm only one person in a single department. So help, help. And so I knew that I wanted to spend this money by investing in the talent, by planting seeds here at CRC. Other campuses I know spent the money on designing murals around their campuses, which I'm sure are great, bringing fancy speakers to their campuses, which I'm sure are wonderful, or putting on conferences of their own. And I said to Dr. Bush, I'm not going to die for this job, and we will not reproduce the structures that oppress us. So along comes this amazing collective of people who were already doing the work. We're already doing work that embodies the values represented in ethnic studies, that ethnic studies mobilizes in the classroom, in their interactions with students. And so that is how we all came together. We not only were able to send groups of us, not everybody got to go to everything. So we met regularly to talk about our experiences, and the space that was created when we met. We didn't always get to go through the agenda. And then after a while, there was no agenda, right? But that's what made it magic. That's what made it magic, is that it wasn't a space where we were constantly forced to produce or perform. It was actually a space where we were like, my kid, your kid, my husband did this and this and this. Here's what's going on with my life. How are you? The other quote that I really love from that book, Undrowned, is a part where we learn about how river dolphins swimming in muddy Amazon waters actually communicate with each other. They can't see because the water is muddier than the ocean. So what they do is they constantly echolocate. They travel in a pod and they echolocate. That is the metaphor I use to think about my relationship with people on this campus. I'm constantly echolocating, sending out, help, help, I'm drowning a little bit. How are you? If I know where you are, I know where I am. And that is the exercise, that is the check-in, that is the assignment that I carry with me into the classroom. Oh, thank you. Which clip is it? Okay. Yes. So this is the list of places and spaces that some of us at different moments in time were lucky enough to be part of. The conferences that are on this list went as far as Hawaii, West Africa, and as exotic as Sacramento downtown, and LAX, right? The hotel near LAX. But the spaces, the experiences, the conversations, and the people, those lessons that we gathered exceeded the containers that these spaces provided, right? And you'll hear about some of those experiences today. We gathered the lessons and brought them back. That was the idea, right? We plant the seeds with the seed money. We grow this grove of wonder and radical imagination and repair. And then we share out with our campus community. So here's the flow for today. We'll hear from our different panelists about their experiences at the various conferences they attended. And then we'll take a small break, come back, and do an activity where we'll reimagine something together, right? Where we'll start to think about what are the root systems that guide all of us? What are the root systems that guide you? And how do you mobilize those systems in the classroom and in your interactions with students in the role that you serve? I want to remind us all of some community guidelines, and these I will read out loud as well. Every story that you hear ends with a period. People's experiences are not up for debate, and they are not up for questioning. We accept that we all speak in drafts, meaning we embrace the opportunity to grow and change our minds. We practice care-filled and deep listening. We do not interrupt. We do not seek to disrupt. We practice patience for dealing with technology, and we keep our minds open to new ways of creating and being in community. Another way of saying that is we keep our minds open to being in right relationship with each other. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic off to our first colleague, Dr. Jose Alfaro.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to present today. I will be doing a bit of reading. I'm recovering, my body and mind are recovering from a dance festival this past weekend. So my circadian rhythm is off because I was going to sleep at 5 a.m. for 3 days in a row. But it was worth it. Okay, so today I titled this narrative, Do I Remain a Revolutionary? And that's riffing off of Lorraine Hansberry, the Black feminist lesbian writer, author of A Raisin in the Sun. So I'll begin. When reflecting on the work I have done this year with this wonderful cohort of people committed to ethnic studies, I feel deeply inspired by our labor of love as educators and deeply touched by the way we have shown up for each other's well-being as we continue to survive the horrors of our unsurprising political landscape. It might seem unusual for me to pair the word horror next to unsurprising, to share that I am both inspired and devastated in this moment, to hold both of those emotions together, and to begin my story here. But I do this consciously aware that while I am unsurprised by how violent systems affect minoritized peoples, I remain horrified by our present moment, and I honor this feeling because I remain committed to a world that does not normalize the dehumanization of the students we serve. Even if that world is not yet here, I am honored to sit here and move through the horror with these people. During my participation with the Ethnic Studies cohort, I was able to attend NCORE and COLEGAS conferences. At NCORE, I was particularly impacted by one presentation conducted by 4 Asian American women. Their presentation was titled, How 4 Asian American Women Transformed Their English Department. During the presentation, the women shared stories of their experiences within their department, acknowledging the white supremacy of the field of English literature, while also discussing how the department itself had for a long time only hired white faculty. After 2 Asian American women were hired, one of their white colleagues said, after a 3rd Asian American woman was hired, if they were sure they wanted to hire a third because there were already enough of them there. Never mind that these women were still outnumbered by a majority of white faculty when he said these words. This story reminded me of the ways in which whiteness and maleness are rendered as apolitical and invisible identities, and how that historically influences the practices we use to hire within our departments, even when we champion diversity and inclusion. I found the language of enough to be troubling, since we know that nearly every department in higher education in the United States has no shortage of white faculty. I was reminded how the faculty representation at our own college still does not reflect the diversity of our student body, and how true structural change at the faculty level cannot be made possible simply by completing a hiring the best training. As these women shared, part of this transformative work requires that we name what has been unnamed and make visible what white supremacy tries to erase, even if that erasure is the very own face of its politically charged identity. Beyond hiring practices, the women on this panel also shared stories about their own pedagogy and writing practices with students. I have been haunted by one chilling question they asked during their presentation. They asked us all, is a little white supremacy leaked into anti-racist work better than no anti-racist work at all? The point of the question, I think, was to get us to see where white supremacy has leaked into our own work, even when we have the best intentions as instructors. One example they provided was the practice of assigning diverse texts, how some instructors feel their work is done after diversifying their curriculum without also interrogating how they assess student work and student writing. As they reminded us during their presentation, assessment outcomes are also anti-racist work. Every assignment we give students is an opportunity to do anti-racist work. In the age of artificial intelligence, I've grown more and more skeptical of traditional ways we assess student writing, though my skepticism has always been present. While I have been frustrated by the amount of students I have seen turning to AI to write their essays for them over the last 2 semesters, and again, I'm not against AI, it's just I've seen 100% AI essays, and it's frustrating. What frustrates me more, though, if not angers me more, are not the students, but the system that created the conditions for students to turn to AI, because they do not believe that what they write and how they speak is good. That's what angers me. In other words, I am angry because I know that students are turning there because for years their teachers have not honored what they had to say. And in 16 weeks, I have to convince them that I will. And it's really difficult to do that. Because these teachers, in the centuries-long echo of white supremacist teachers that stole language from indigenous students in boarding schools, have tried to mold them into scholars that reproduce white language supremacy and forget where they come from. They are turning there, in other words, because they think that this is the key to their belonging here. So at this NCORE session, I left both angry and hopeful. Hopeful because the women on the panel transformed their department through strategic hiring. Hopeful because the presentation ended with teachers dreaming about new assignments. One teacher suggested that perhaps we have students write a second essay as a reply to teacher feedback so that more direct dialogue could happen between student and professor. Another shared that they have been turning toward more critical family histories for their prompts within the classroom. And another suggested that before students turn in their assignment and receive feedback, they have students answer the following question: what do you want to know about your own writing? I offer these glimmers of hope because I have faith that writing instructors will not be the only ones to labor along with student writing, and that faculty in other disciplines like history, sociology, anthropology, etc., will take a deep look at how we assess writing and what we value as good writing. While our own English department at CRC works hard to increase student success and retention, our department can't do that alone. At our last convocation, we celebrated that students are passing English in a timely manner since AB 705 passed, but we are still seeing students struggle as they move into their other classes. During the fall convocation, I heard a colleague in another department read that data and say, you see, we are setting students up to fail with these AB 705 changes and extra support. They clearly aren't prepared for their next classes. I held my tongue that day. I can see how one might come to such conclusions by glancing at data like this, but what I wanted to say was that I agree we are failing our students, but that is not because of the added support we have been giving students in the English department. What we have done has been transformative, but that change cannot happen in one single department. If our students are failing when they go into other classes, why is our first instinct not to look in the mirror, to see if it is not possible that if our colleagues in other departments continue to value white language supremacy in student writing, if our colleagues assess student writing without critical engagement with anti-racist ideas, if our colleagues in other departments do not value student voices more than the sterile and dull language of academia that AI so easily generates, those students will fail. It is no wonder to me that students turn to AI. What if we stop preparing students for that potential next professor who might not assess them like we do? What if we gave students the language to understand, unmask, and make visible how that other professor will assess them? What if we gave that assessment the identity it refuses to speak out loud? What if we stopped feeding each other white supremacy to survive? What if we learned how to stop? I am trying to stop the white supremacy that leaks into my most liberatory of dreams. The questions that arose for me at NCORE continued at COLEGAS, especially as I attended on the eve and day of the presidential election results. Although my gut knew the direction we would go in as a country, I could not anticipate all the anxieties I felt following the results. Walking into my Puente classroom, a space where I feel many of my students look up to me as a beacon of hope, I felt incapable of inciting hope. I felt myself sinking into despair. I felt powerless because I wanted to protect my students. For this reason, attending Colegas felt disorienting. On the one hand, I was enthralled by Prisca Dorcas, who, the author of Brown Girls with Sharp Edges. There, she spoke about how the readings in her college classrooms helped turn her into a feminist who healed her from white supremacy and the misogyny she grew up with in her home. On the other hand, I felt this incommensurable contradiction that has plagued me as an educator. How do I inhabit this college setting, a space that is tied to the structures of this country and its vision of empire, a place where our own data makes visible that we are tied to the corruption of white supremacist power? How do I live here and speak of things like revolution to my students? The path to answering that question leads me to think about my mentor, and I'll be ending here shortly. My mentor and teacher at San Francisco State, which is also the home of ethnic studies. But my mentor, Sarita Cannon, who changed my life. Not too long ago, she and I were talking about how we remained firm believers that the classroom was a sacred space where we could create revolution. But at the same time, we struggled to fully settle the contradictions of our privilege in the university setting. Our conversation didn't end in an answer, but we did sit in our discomfort, that place from where all good learning begins. We landed on another question that the Black lesbian writer Lorraine Hansberry asked near the end of her life at the age of 34. She says, "Do I remain a revolutionary? Intellectually, without a doubt. But am I prepared to give my body to the struggle or even my comforts? This is what I puzzle about." I think this is the question we educators live in. What are the discomforts we are willing to experience? The attachment to the ideas we are willing to give up, to give ourselves over to revolutionary freedom and love for one another. And if we fail to do so one day, can we wake up the next morning, ask the question, and try again? I move through this puzzling maze of a question with the company of my colleagues here. Thank you. And Jarrell is next, yes.
Good morning, family. My name is Dr. Jerome McGifford, and I had the privilege of attending NCORE. This image you see here is what NCORE encapsulates. This is the aim, the goal, the mission. This is the mission in image form. The idea is to create a welcoming environment. And for me, what NCORE represented was, this is my first non-Umoja, non-Amin conference post-COVID. And I was amazed by the sheer number of people in the room. For me, this was an opportunity to be in a space with some of the leading thought leaders and change makers across the world and in our country. So I love being in this space. This one? Okay. I had the opportunity to sit in on this amazing presentation the day I became Palestinian. Emil Issa gave this astounding story of her journey into coming into her ethnic and cultural identity. She was born into a family of love and culture, and she learned disdain, fear, and that she was other. She encountered her culture and her ethnic upbringing clashed with American, and let me say this differently. Her ethnic upbringing clashed with white supremacy. In doing so, she adopted another name that was easier for others to say. She learned that she could pass when it became convenient and as a survival technique. Think about what it might have felt like for Amal Issa during 9/11, her and her family. So it was a survival technique to adapt, to be flexible. And in the midst of her talk, I started to think about my own ethnic identity and the journey that I took, that I found, that I explored into becoming who I am. And I identify as African American. And I started to think about the things that made me and that make me who I am as I travel through my journey. I think one of the most important things is I lived next to Big Mama until the age of 16. My Big Mama was from Alabama, deeply Southern roots for both of my parents as well. But being next to Big Mama imparted culture through storytelling. The way she loved on me and my siblings, the way we were disciplined. I was also raised in Long Beach in the midst of, I was born in 1977. So I'm an 80s baby. And I was, I was raised in the midst of the crack epidemic in Long Beach, California. LA County was in the midst of immense gang violence. And all of that has sprinkles and flavors how I became. I also had the luxury of attending San Diego State, and there I discovered African American Studies. In African American Studies, I got glimpses of my story. There were things that my parents didn't necessarily talk about. Culture was embedded in our being, but I learned language at San Diego State. San Diego State was also an opportunity for me to grow up away from my family. 2 hours away, but it was miles. It was a green mile of experience that I was able to take from my time there. I would also say that growing up in the Black church has really flavored who I became. It taught me about possibility. It taught me about discipline. It taught me about love. It also taught me about to be able to decipher. And there's things that I can accept, and there's things that I need to screen and filter. Things that were told to me about what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, what it means to be a Black man in this culture. I would say the other thing that really sticks out for me are the women on my journey who really taught me how to love, who taught me how to be strong. Growing up, I was one of the few children on my block who had a father in home. So there was a lot of insight that I was gaining from this experience at NCORE, because it pushed me to reflect in ways that I hadn't done in a while. So I also had this other moment of reflection. So while I'm in audience of Amal Issa's sharing of her life story, I'm really taking it in. And then I start to notice, so there's almost like two different experiences that I have during this presentation. She is trolled during her story, and it's vicious. So while I'm listening, I'm thinking about this talk that I heard, this sermon from T.D. Jakes, and he talks about three types of people. He talks about comrades, constituents, and confidants. Comrades, they are against what you are against. Well, let me take it back a step. He says, if you are a child of destiny, there will be three types of people you come across. Comrades, they are against what you are against. Constituents, they are for what you are for. Comrades and constituents aren't for you. They are either against what you are against or they are for what you are for, but they are not for you. Confidants are there for you and they are about you. It also made me think of Dr. Patina Love's conversation about allies versus co-conspirators. Co-conspirators are willing to sacrifice and willing to place themselves in the line of fire. So during this conversation, as Amal Issa is being heckled, I sit in silence because I don't know what decorum is in this space. I don't know how to stand up for her. So I sit in silence. And in reflection, I think about the cost of my silence, what it felt like to not have someone, what it might have felt like for me not to have someone stand up and interrupt. And so I think about my voice, I think about action, I think about affirmation. So after the moment has passed, I also didn't want to take away from the moment. After the moment is passed, I go up to Amal Issa and we commune. So at that moment, I'm wondering if I was ally or co-conspirator. And when I think about allies, allies are great, but sometimes allies are merely cheerleaders on the sidelines. If you are not willing to get into the fight, what's the cost of your silence? This symbol is the articulation of the spaces I aim to co-create with the students that I serve and the colleagues I have the privilege of working with. Thank you. Brandy?
Good morning, everyone. Oh, y'all sound a little asleep, but I know it's the first day back, but it's cool. Good morning. It's a beautiful cold morning here. All right. So for me, I centered my experiences on a couple of things. I went to the APAHE conference in Oakland, and I also, previous in 2022, went to the ADES conference in Ghana. So I'll be speaking a little bit about those things. My talk story today is centered on a few things. Cross-cultural experiences, my personal journey through education, understanding the word first generation and what they may look like, understanding what the diaspora means for BIPOC folk and what does it mean to be connected as BIPOC folk, and then this concept that I'm still trying to grasp called shared humanity. So I had a hard time trying to think of this one, maybe because of the current climate of our country, maybe because of my current age, who knows. Either way, it took me time to cultivate what Winnie had asked us to do, right? And I appreciate her leadership. So as we move through today, I'm not reading these questions to you, they're for you to look at currently. I want you to reflect on them because it is what allowed me to create this moment. I had to go back a little bit because I could not do it by myself, apparently. So I needed to think about who that came before me and may have had a moment of what we're calling radical anything, right? Who had that moment? I believe some of these people did. My grandmother, Thelma Miller, drank from colored fountains only. My great-grandmother, Aretha Mae Weaver, drank from colored fountains only. My grandma just died in 2021. If you ever forget what things look like in a matriarchal family, look at me. I am here. The women that I came from, you see in these pictures here, I only knew the middle one, my great-grandmother, Aretha Mae Weaver, and I knew my grandmother, obviously. And what I learned in the reality of where we're seated as ancestors is BIPOC, when I went to these conferences, meant we shared a lot of traumas. We shared a lot of displacement. We shared a lot of language and love lost. We shared grieving in a way I can't put into words. So when I come to the conference and I come to the cohort meetings and I understand what it means to be in shared humanity, it gives me a different view of my own ancestry, a deeper love for it that maybe I didn't have before. The realities of who I am and this idea of some of these shared traumas, I learned things more about the diaspora and the impacts to those that had been to internment camps in this very country. I learned about veterans, much like myself, that could not come back. They fought for us and were not allowed back in. That happened in this country to the BIPOC folk. I also realized when I looked at the years here you see on the screen, it took my family 100 years to have a college graduate with a master's degree. That's me and 4 other cousins. That's what this looks like systemically. Don't ever forget. The reality of that 100 years, though, is the hard work those women gave to us. I did not grow up anybody's minority. I grew up in a loving family of Black women that never apologized for being such. Short hair, long hair, blind, we don't care. We are Black and we are here and we love you. I was loved. So as I said, get my little notes together. When we think about root systems, which you all will be coming to later, some big things came up for me. Ancestral respect is a big thing, as you can see, because I'm speaking to that. Obviously, understanding what it means to have something titled cultural wealth, right? What I'm speaking of gives me a deep value for who I am, how I show up, and how I show up with people. Again, shared humanity. I tried my best to think of the things that were important to me, right? So there you see an uncle of mine, my grandmother's brother, great uncle. He served in the Army. Most of my family did. Most of the men served in the military. And that's an ancestral grave there. My family was fortunate enough in Georgia to buy their own plot when back in the 1900s-ish, right? Had their own plot. Did anyone know that cemeteries were segregated? Who knew that? I did not. It broke my heart. It broke my heart that my family had worked to bury themselves respectfully, because that didn't always happen. And yet in death, hate still followed. That hurt. So when I look at that reality, and I think of when I went to Ghana in 2022, and I'm at the last bath, and I'm thinking of roots, and I'm thinking of respect, and I'm thinking of that racism still exists, and I'm thinking of that wall behind you, you see, of ancestors, an ancestral grave to say, who could we bring back and bury with respect? That's shared humanity. That's love. That's care for those we do not know their names, possibly at times. When we do a land acknowledgement, we are embodying the same concept. We are bringing an awareness to who we are and what we're doing with better intentionality to ensure we do not repeat the things that continue to harm. As someone that is first generation, I've also learned another skill. Intellectual coping. Anyone ever heard of this? I think I made it up. Okay, no, I did it. Okay, good. All right. So intellectual coping is a thing, right? Education is healing and transformative. So of course, when you educate a community, guess what they get to do together? They get to use that intellect to cope. Welcome to our collective, right? They get to use that to do other things to move us through and towards a way, again, of shared humanity. It seems radical, right? It seems weird to think of it as a radical thing. But I would imagine Martin Luther King would say, this is radical. This moment today, if he was alive, he could say, oh God, look at this room. This is radical. I hope in 50 years, someone like us says the same thing in the room they're in. Other things I learned was about communal spaces. At the APAHE conference, I met some really powerful women that reminded me to speak in my voice, meaning if I know a word or term that is African, I can start with that and then maybe tell you a little bit about it later if I choose. But I can start with my voice. I don't have to apologize or change it. I can explain it, but I don't have to change it. The reality, though, is what happens for students. If I say education is healing, you would see these things, right? Co-development of learning resources, moments of shared experiences between the educator, the learner, etc. You would see more opportunities to engage in discussions that allow depth of learning. As I built my own skills with education is healing, I use this word reclaimed. I believe students need to reclaim their education if they want to heal through it. I believe that some of those things are here for you to look at. And I also believe the bolded terms are a way for us to connect to the action items we could do to ensure this became true one day. In the picture, you see me there with Jane Elliott. That was at Sac City College some time ago. Time? Perfect, thank you. And so that was an opportunity for me to understand what happens when I use my voice. Ironically, I had emailed that woman after watching something she put on YouTube to see what she alive, then also see would she respond to me. And she did with a fire I did not know existed in an email. I was like, is this really her? Is this like somebody that, it was her. And so I met her. It doesn't get more active in your voice than that. It doesn't get more active, right? The universe will help you find the way if you forget. So what I took from all these things I've been to is this reality that the flipping of this script, which is the biggest thing from APAHE that I took, changing the narrative. And that meant that I had to begin to think of my students in the way I had been treated when I was in the Air Force. When students tell me they're treated in a certain way on this campus, I am still in shock, and I will always be. Why? I was never treated that way. I was an active duty member, right? I was in the Air Force, came to class in uniform. They deeply respected us. So I deeply respect my students, and I get confused when others don't. But again, the respect has been earned and worked for. Cultural wealth of the military is broad and big. What I'll close with is radical inclusion, my favorite word. Radical is always my favorite word since I found it, because it really means that I didn't know what to do. Wait a minute, I could do something radical. You didn't think of it yet. So think of it. All right, and once you do that thing, cultivate it, embody it, nurture it, begin to love it as it is your own. What I leave you with is a couple quotes to reflect upon. And the reality for me about cultural wealth and flipping the script and ensuring that I'm always entering spaces with student voices centered best I can. And if I miss it, I hope somebody reminds me. I want us to understand that everything we do is an action. Everything available to us in this time has come from great ancestors saying it, planting seeds across the nation to bring us here. And that cannot be forgotten. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
That was beautiful. All the things that have come before has been beautiful. Let's give another round of applause to our presenters, to our administrators. Or I'm going to set myself a timer because I can get passionate too. Dr. Bush, I can get passionate. For those that don't know me, I am Kendra Amos, Ethnic Studies professor here at CRC. We love our institution. And the conference that I attended was ADES of this past year. Now, ADES was revolutionary. ADES was life-changing. It wasn't just an opportunity. I have an amen in the back. I love amen, snaps, claps. I welcome it. Just like Jarrell, I come from a talk back church, so I'm okay with the feedback. But it's something that I want to share, just a piece of history that our students, a lot of our students, go throughout their entire lives unaware. A piece of history that a lot of us as faculty go throughout our entire lives unaware until today. So just a little bit about the trip before we get into that history. The theme of the conference, colonization to sovereignty, the future of educating the African diaspora. And just to share a little bit of what that African diaspora is for those that don't know, because I don't want to assume we all know the same information. The African diaspora is the dispersal of African people around the world. So when you go to Guatemala, Black folks are there. When you go to Spain, Black folks are there. You go to Mexico, guess what? Black folks are there. We are worldwide. I want you to look at your neighbor and say, they are worldwide. Black folks are worldwide, yes. And so what we did while in Ghana, West Africa, the beautiful space of Ghana, West Africa, let me just take a little selfish moment and say, I made it home, y'all. I made it home. And touching down even into the airport, I'm seeing the signages for the banks and for restaurants, and they all looked like me. That was a moment. And so exploring the impact of colonization as we are reaching towards sovereignty in our education. You're going to hear a lot of sovereignty. You're going to hear a lot of what this is going to look like for Black folks. We may say, Kendra, I'm not Black. How does this apply to me? I want you to hold that thought, and we're going to come right back to that, all right? In that, I want us to recognize, as it was said earlier, we are here to serve our students. If it wasn't for our students, we would not be here. So it is imperative for us as faculty to humble ourselves in a position to serve and empower our students. Let me see, let me go this way. Let me use the right button. All right. Dr. Bush, I was a little afraid when you were speaking because you were all up in my presentation. I said, oh my, if he goes another 60 seconds, he just might as well wrap it up. But as an instructor, no matter if I'm teaching African American studies, if I'm teaching Intro to Ethnic Studies, which I cover multiple ethnic backgrounds, I use an African-centered framework. Everyone say African-centered. You don't have to be Black in order to receive and learn through African-centered framework. So what does that mean? Cultural relevance. What kind of material are you teaching? How are you teaching your material? Whether if you are a communications teacher, a math teacher, English, bio, chemistry, you can use African-centered education. Community involvement. When it comes to African-centered education, we involve everybody. My business is your business. The business of the students is your business. The way that they show up is your business. If they fail or pass, it's your business. They are not another number. And if that is etched in your brain today, it's a good day, don't fret, because it's an opportunity to change that. also to empower them. They are not just the world of tomorrow, but they are the world of today. And we must treat them as such. Now, why is this important? Kendra, you're talking about a lot of African-centered education. We can appreciate that, maybe or maybe not. Why is this important? Because some things happened in our history that we don't talk about. 28 million Africans were enslaved and sold between the 15th and the 19th century. 12.5 of them going to the Caribbean, 16 million of them being traded between North Africa through the Middle East, and approximately, because we don't know the numbers, but an estimate of 4 million losing their lives through the transit. So let me take a pause right now and acknowledge, if you have, let me say not if, because you have African American students in your classes, because you have African American colleagues, every time you look at them, you need to identify them as a miracle. Why? Because in just a moment, I'm going to walk you through just a bit of our history. A bit of our history to the coast and coming to the Americas, because I don't have time to start talking about what happened when we got on this ground. I believe there is power in our stories, and so I'm going to do my best to tell this story as I do tell this story to my students. So when you consider, I wish I was a little taller. Shouldn't have worn my kitten heels today. But imagine, let's say we're going to go to Mali, right? On foot, enslaved Africans were brought, not just from the coast, but they went further out to bring Africans in, traveling by foot. And for those that feel that Africans were docile and they were quickly humbled, I will tell you that that was not the story. From the moment of captivity, we fought. From the moment of captivity, we rebelled, civil disobedience. And so what it looked like, if an African man or woman refused to go along with what the slave catchers were doing, they would beat them so bad that they would be bloody. Tie them to a tree and let wildlife finish them off. My ancestors. While in Ghana, they took us to a location, a sacred ground called the Last Bath. This was the location that they took my ancestors. I'm going to say it like that because I'm taking it personally. Where they took my ancestors to wash before they took them to the dungeons. We'll get to the dungeons in a little bit. Now, the bath wasn't for the purpose to be cleansed, but it was for the purpose to humiliate them. Imagine being a grown man, a grown woman, and you have to strip bare before another person and wash yourself. Taking the dignity, taking the respect, taking the humanity. This was the process of turning people into property. And when we think about it, sometimes we turn our students from people into numbers. People into just a spot. People into, I don't care if you show up, I'll drop you. I don't care if you have gone through this stuff, I'll fail you. People into property. As you see, a woman standing here in awe of receiving the Spirit. Dr. Bush and some others mentioned about spirit and education, and they do belong in the same space. I'm almost done, y'all. Then they took us to what the world calls castles, but we renamed dungeons because there was nothing magical about the place that my ancestors stood. Right here in the center, if and only if, can y'all see me? Sorry, folks, if are online, just roll with me. If we see how big this table is, I might bring it out just until right here. From here to here. Over 100 men and women pushed into this space. Men were separated from women and they stood there for 3 months. Where you stood is where you slept, is where you went to the bathroom, it's where women menstruated. Where you stood is where you ate, and if you caught the food, then you caught it. If you didn't, you didn't. Let's look here. This floor once, when it was first erected, had a brick floor. The floor that we see here is the DNA of my ancestors. The blood, the sweat, the tears, the skin, the saliva, the urine created a whole nother floor. Kendra, why are you saying all of this? Why are you saying all of this? I'm saying this because when you see your Black students, they struggle with things that sometimes they are unaware of. And so you have the opportunity to take what you've learned today and apply it as treating students as people and not just a number. And in closing, I know my time is drawing near. Black studies, ethnic studies, we are here to do the work, to undo the assumed inferiorities of Black folks, of people of color. Every single time you see on the news or in media or even in the classroom, and we have professors on this campus, because let me tell y'all, the students are telling on y'all. Surprise! How many students a semester comes to me and say, Professor Amos, I took so-and-so's class and they told me ethnic studies is a waste of time. They told me, even though it's a requirement, you go and forget about everything you learned in ethnic studies. What does it look like on this campus for professors to discourage learning at a college? I'm calling it to the carpet. Not to condemn, but to have conversation about this cannot go on any further. And so I implore you to encourage your students to take these classes. And if you don't know and say, hey, I need some help and some support, reach out to us. Because once again, we're here to serve who? Thank you.
Okay, well, I feel like I'm following Dr. Bush. So, oh gosh, that's great. Okay, good morning. All right. So, I had the privilege of attending NCORE and COLEGAS. And I want to start by first being really transparent about why I chose the workshop that I chose specifically at NCORE. And what I appreciate about the process of being a part of this cohort, it has really forced me to just be, what's the term? What is it called? Thank you. Introspective, right? And really reflect on myself and what areas of growth, and then just realizing like, I've always considered myself a very relational individual, right? And not recognizing the folks that I have unintentionally ignored or who have been invisible in the way in which I move in my spaces or on my job. And so I think it's really important to pause and tell you what I reflected on as I was sort of building this. I'm gonna actually jump to the next slide so you can see this image, which will capture some of what I'm gonna say. So many of you may know Fong, that's my colleague. He has no idea I'm about to do this. Don't tell him. That's my right-hand man in tutoring services. But I have to be honest and say, when I first started, him and I started at the same time. And I remember when my dean at the time said, you're gonna be working real closely with this guy named Bong Bang. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. And I remember going home and when you realize you're gonna be working with somebody and you're like, I don't get it, how's this relationship gonna be and all this. And I remember having this anxiety that I didn't quite understand and thinking things that I didn't quite process until later, right? Like, and I said this to my husband last night. I said, the reality was, if my dean had said, you're going to be working with Gladys Sanchez, right? That name in itself would have made me feel more comfortable. I'm being really honest with you all. I'm being very honest, okay? And so I thought to myself, when I heard Fong Fang, I thought, I've never worked closely with an Asian person in my life, right? Like I've been in school with, right, and all these things, but I realized I'm going to be working with someone that I don't know that I feel as comfortable, with, and I have to be honest. And so the relationship has been amazing. And so I want to say what I've recognized is that it's important like to realize and be like honest and transparent about the biases that you don't even realize you had. I didn't even want to use that word. I almost didn't write it on my notes. I almost didn't write it. And I realized the importance of naming it because I literally was going, what's call this? Like, was it a bias? Was it a what? But I thought, I don't want to use bias. And my husband was looking at me like, I don't know, babe, you could use bias. So I was like, oh, okay. Okay, maybe I had a bias that I didn't realize I had or why, right? And so I had to reflect on my upbringing, right? Just experiences I've had. Maybe it's because I've, sort of succumbed to this idea of model minorities and maybe some of it was some of my experiences that weren't so favorable as a child and as an adult still, right? Sometimes having an experience that I feel like, now why did they just treat me like that? And why did they just not, you know what I mean? And so when I went to NCORE, I was very intentional about picking workshops that challenged me. And so I focused on the Asian experience, recognizing I don't have enough knowledge, nor have I ever sought to seek the information, right? And so that's what I did with NCORE. So I'm gonna back up. So for NCORE, I went, so sorry, one more piece of the story before I do that. So him and I ended up going to NCORE together, sort of randomly, but I chose, workshops that focuses on the Asian experience. And so again, like I said, me and Fong's relationship has been amazing. We have grown as family. We're kin. We are kin. We are truly kin. But let me tell you how the plot thickens. And you all don't know this. At COLEGAS, I was spending a lot of time with Karen, who unfortunately is not here today, but she's a part of our cohort. And I spent a lot of time with Karen, and I'm talking to Karen, and we're just getting to know each other more. And little did I know, she's Hmong, right? So we start talking about her family, doing all this, and we're just really getting to know each other. And something she said sort of just triggered like, why does your family sound like Fong's family? And no lie, I said, so, I start asking her questions. I start texting Fong, right? Sure enough, they are cousins. No, they are whole cousins. But what's crazy is I said, now after, and again, 5 years, we're talking 5 years now, me and Fong have worked together. 5 years later, we're kin, we're cousins, we're brothers, right? He gave me a Hmong name. Like, it's a whole thing, right? I've learned so much. And then to truly get to know Karen, not knowing. And so it's like the way God did this, like we family, that's my family, right? And I can honestly say it's really affecting me now and thinking about the work that I do and how I do it, right? And like I said, the people who have been invisible and unintentionally visible and the biases I've held that I didn't know I held. And so I want y'all to know the way that it'll work when you start to really be honest and real about things that you don't know or don't realize about you. Just, it's such a growing process. And it's been such a growing process going through this and reflecting on all of these feelings that I've had before. And so when I went to NCORE, I went to a couple of sessions. One of them was the importance of authentic solidarity. And again, this is me reflecting on, have I been authentically, having solidarity with my Asian community, all these things, right? It's like, no, I have not, right? I have not, and I'm being honest. And so sitting through this session, learning and hearing about what authentic solidarity looks like, right? It's relational, not transactional, right? It should be rooted in truth, right? In honesty. I loved this quote where they said, it's gonna be failure, rupture, and repair. And I was like, how deep is that? Because right, none of us are perfect. And we are gonna say things, we're gonna do things unintentionally or maybe intentionally, right? That are gonna cause harm to others. And it's about then how do we repair that and move forward and grow together within that, right? And so that was so impactful for me. It was about honoring others, getting to know others, not being about my own self-interest, right? And so this quote was said, solidarity is more like jazz than marking all the right answers on a multiple choice quiz. What? Right? When you think about jazz and just like, it's like, yeah, exactly. It's improvisation. It's all these really cool, different things. And so I was like, yes, that was perfect. It's complex, right? And so that was one of my large takeaways from that session. The next one I went to was understanding the history of anti-Blackness in the Asian community. Oh, gosh. And I sat through that session and it was hard, right? It was hard. It's like listening to the history and then also just sharing in our stories together. And it talked about the struggle for racial advancement has been to seek white acceptance or proximity to whiteness, right? Which then sort of created the anti-Blackness. And so this is a straight quote from the presenter. Black people are pushed down by white supremacy and anti-Blackness, but Asians are pushed down by white supremacy, but pushed up by anti-Blackness. And it just was all this stuff that was just like hitting like, oh God, right? And so reflecting on like how that's then affected the way we commune with each other, the way we relate to each other or don't relate to each other, right? And within my own self, the way I've related or not related, right? And so there was so much history there that I didn't know. Just talking about the way politics was used to pit Asians and Blacks against each other. So much history. And to be honest with you, I left feeling like this is so large. And I love that I have the privilege of being an educator and working in these environments with you, but it felt like this is such a large, rooted history of, hate and these things. And I'm like, I wish there was a way to get some of this messaging out to the world, right? It's like those feelings that, of like, how do we get this to more people? How do we really talk about these issues so we can move forward? But again, within myself, I'm moving forward and doing what I can, right, in my role here. And then the other session talked about unpacking data and how, oh my gosh, 1 minute. Oh my gosh. Okay, Southeast Asian student data is often buried. Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, perfect. Under-captured. And so it made me reflect on how are we capturing data, looking at data, and I'll go in a little bit about that. COLEGAS, I went to a session that talked about decolonizing how we help people through accompanimiento, accompanying or walking alongside with each other. And so this was so big for me because it was talking about how a lot of times when we help people, there's a sort of like hierarchy with it, right? There's this like, and so accompanying is a non-hierarchical way of relating to others in the struggle. It's an orientation towards teaching and learning. And so I'm going to jump fast because I know I ran out of time. I can't believe I was the one that talked the most. Letting students go through the struggle, focusing on relationships, leaving space for curiosity, asking strategic questions, moving slower, and resisting the urge to cover more ground. And this is, again, I'm the tutoring services coordinator. So all this is just like, oh my goodness, right? And so this semester, I'm going to do observations with our tutors, and I'm going to take the time to sit down with them. And when I give them feedback, I'm also going to work on building those relationships, learning our tutors, right? Being relational so that I can teach them how to be relational, right? Because it's one thing to help, but they also need to learn how do you build those relationships so students have an authentic appreciation for education and what they're learning and not just doing it to get by. So these are questions in the process that I've had and that I've toiled with in my story. Whose story is our data telling or not telling? And what ways can we flip our approaches in tutoring? How do we move from students participating out of compliance and then moving into more engagement? Am I practicing authentic solidarity? Authentic solidarity? Are we investing in students in a way that their value and their worth is recognized and acknowledged? And I'm going to leave with this quote. We have learned that we are going to change a system. If we're going to change a system, we first have to see what the system is producing. Then we have to engage with others to design something different. And finally, we have to actually act. All right.
Let's give another round of applause for our presenters, yes? We heard a lot of amazing information, reflection, and stories. What we'd like for y'all to do is take about 10 minutes. Take care of yourselves in this 10 minutes, right? Maybe it's a conversation at your table. Maybe it's a bio break. There's some snacks at the back, but really sit with this because when we come back, we're gonna have an interactive session where we're gonna get a chance to kind of reflect on what we've just heard and put that into practice in our own lives and how we are moving through spaces here on campus. So can we agree to come back around 10:43-ish? Sounds good. We'll see you then. Thank you. Folks online, we will just reappear at that time. We're going to start to bring it back together. We're going to start to kind of wrap things up. Okay, okay. Folks online, are we back? Can you hear us? If we could get a few reactions, that would be great. There was a lot of discussion and dialogue in person. Okay, great. I see some, at least one thumbs up. One person online can hear us. Okay. All right, fantastic. Well, this brings us to the second half of our time together, being radical or reimagining and listening to stories. But before we move into that, I think we should absolutely pause and take some time to welcome one of the newest members to our family here at CRC. So I will stop there and ask the new Ethnic Studies faculty person to come on up. And I want you to say, come on up. Congratulations. Now, there's a reason why I'm not saying your name. For me, I believe that when students come into the classroom and, you know, we have the roster and we say folks' names, I don't like to say their names first because I believe that the classroom is a sacred space, and the first time that their name is said in the space, that they should say it themselves with their own tone and inflection and accent and everything, like own that space. So for you, coming to your first of many PD Institutes during Flex Week, I would like for you to state who you are, say your name with all the pride and excitement that we feel for you being here on campus.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Ricky Gutierrez Maldonado. I use he, him, el pronouns. I am so grateful to be here today. I was telling the folks, I'm like, I sat at the right table. This is my first CRC anything professional development meeting, whatever. I'm like, what a space to walk into. Y'all are like some smart ass people. I'm like, damn. I'm like, okay. I was like, you all got like some good folks here. So I'm deeply honored and grateful to join CRC. I'm a little bit overwhelmed with like everything that I have to do, right? All the HR stuff. But it is what it is, right? We've all started new jobs before. You got to do all that. So I am deeply honored and grateful. I can't wait to meet you if I haven't met you yet. Thank you.
Congratulations. Fantastic. All right. So I am also part of the collective, the Ethnic Studies Collective, and I just briefly, I think what was shared earlier before the break, we are full. And so I'm going to share just a little bit, and then we're going to move into our interactive activity. So I had the opportunity to attend NCORE in Hawaii, and then also the All African Diaspora Education Summit. And like Brandy, I was able to attend in 2022, and then again in 2024. What I wanted to, I'm going to skip some of these slides because, yeah, I said, oh well, I thought I was. Eventually it will go. Oh, here, yeah, this is great. I'm gonna put on my professional development hat. What you heard from my colleagues, my esteemed colleagues today, was able to happen because they got out. They moved away from this campus and went somewhere, all right? Some of us went really, really far, okay? Some of us, as Winnie had mentioned earlier, just went down to downtown Sacramento, just to Oakland. But the idea is that we moved out of this space for us to be able to become even more excellent than we already are, right? And then to bring those ideas, the relationships, the aha moments, to bring those back to campus to serve our students. I strongly believe that we are unable to do this work without getting out, without moving and growing away from the space. There are amazing folks here, absolutely. But if all we do as educators, no matter what your role is here on campus, if all we do is go from home into campus and back, when thinking about what we do on campus and our service to students, that's all we've got. I don't think it's enough. Right? And it doesn't mean you have to go halfway across the world to get the experience. It can mean that on a weekend you decide to go to a New Year's celebration for the Hmong community. It does mean that you can just go over to Valley High School and maybe go to a football game, a basketball game at Valley, see what those students are talking about, what they're into, what the music is playing. So when you get here on campus and they start talking about things, you know what they're talking about, right? I also believe that with professional development, you get a chance for these things: to rest, to be seen, to breathe, to dream, to restore, laugh, heal, and be still. The work in this institution, specifically for me, I speak for myself, but I think a lot of folks feel the same way that I do. It's exhausting. Working in an institution of higher education in some ways is excellent and liberating, but also you see all of the barriers that are in place. The same barriers that were in place when I was going through school are the same barriers that sometimes are in place for our students. And you come on campus and you've got to code switch, you got to strategize, you got to maybe change your communication patterns. You got to decide what you're going to wear, what your hair is going to be like, how you're going to talk. It's exhausting, right? It's exhausting. And I, for sure, for BIPOC folks on this campus, it's exhausting to be here. And if you see us smiling and joking and laughing, absolutely, those are all things are real. And it's exhausting. So just remember, it's exhausting. The energy and effort it takes to walk up those stairs, it's exhausting. And I'm speaking specifically to my BIPOC folks on campus, find ways to get out and find ways to be a part of professional development opportunities here on campus at Wealth, that at least if your body can't get out, your mind can. Think about different things. Because I think that burnout is real, and if you don't have a space to rest, be seen, breathe, dream, restore, laugh, heal, and be still, this isn't going to be a long game for you, right? Okay. The next thing I wanted to share is, so I attended NCORE in ADES, and what I take away from all of those experiences, this idea, I love reading from the books that Naeem Akbar has written, and I carry it around with me. I have several copies because I just keep them everywhere. Every once in a while, if I want some inspiration, I open it up and read it, right? But what he says is that each generation, it's online. I was like, oh, for you?
If you can.
That's okay. I'll talk over it because it's a little background noise. So what he talks about, he's like, what is education? What is the educational process? And so he says it's about knowing yourself. And so he says every society on this planet for eons has believed that each generation has the responsibility of maintaining the level of consciousness attained by the previous generations. That's how we've made, as humans, forward progress, right? We've taught the next generation, okay, don't do this, do that, so on and so forth, and moving through. And advancing the community to even higher levels by the development of their own consciousness. Okay. He also says that the true function of education is identity, legacy of competence, acquired immunities, and a shared vision. Many of our students who identify in the BIPOC community are not getting this type of education. They are not understanding who they are and their true identity. They are not learning about their legacy of competence. They are not getting the required immunities to move forward and grow and strive in society. And oftentimes the vision for this country or the vision for the campus or the vision for the classroom does not include their shared vision. So as we move forward, and this is maybe a through line from all of the different conferences and experiences and conversations I've had with my colleagues, what are we doing in the classroom? Do you know what your educational philosophy is? If someone asks you, what is education? What do you believe is the educational experience for your students? Can you articulate that? And the better question is, can you articulate that to your students? I've had to come to grips with, what is it that I'm doing here? right? Am I providing an education or am I providing socialization? Right? When I require certain things, why am I requiring those things? And let's be honest, and I've had to really come and think about it for myself. Yeah, that's a socialization piece. I want my students to know that in this world, this is how these things work. And so I'm honest with my students about it. This really doesn't have anything to do with comm studies. This really has more to do with how folks are perceiving you socially. All right? Now, this has to do with how you're speaking in public speaking or something of that nature, right? That has, because I'm not gonna go into details. All right, so for us to understand what our philosophy is as far as education is concerned, and then finding out from scholars like Naeem Akbar, we heard our colleagues talk about African-centered education. When we were in Hawaii, the whole conference was really centered around Native experiences in Hawaii, making sure that thousands of folks who were there on the island understood that this was absolutely a beautiful place, but it was also a place of revolution. It was a colonized place, and there were folks fighting to save the Mauna Kea, the big mountain that it's on the island that has the telescopes, right? What education are we trying to impart, right? What education are we trying to impart? So, and then I have two symbols there. Those are Ndinkra symbols. One at the top is a symbol of knowledge, and the Sankofa is the symbol of going back and getting it. And I believe that every culture could really benefit from remembering what is knowledge, what is education, and then also not being afraid of going back and getting what we might not know, what we might have forgotten, and pulling folks along with us. All right. So what we are going to ask you to do is we have created a beautiful handout that you will see online, and we have hard copies here, okay? And we are gonna ask a little bit of think, pair, share. So when these come to you at first, you're gonna see, I'll describe the image, which is a beautiful, colorful image of California, I believe, native plants and their root system, all right? And what we were hoping that you all could do is reflect on the key words from the presentations that you've heard today. And if you could think about these root systems of these native plants as ways for you to be able to understand how do we become the best versions of ourselves for ourselves as educators and for our students. What do we need to stay grounded and to be in community? Now, our hope is that when you're thinking about this, you're thinking deeply, and it's not just the first word that comes to mind, but maybe some of the words that you've heard from the folks who presented today. And we'd like for you to fill in your truth, right? And so I have some notes here. And so the idea is being in community, to be strong and rooted as an educator, to build community with your students. What's under the surface? We'd like for you to include values and grounding structures. What are those words or phrases? That would be helpful there. And then I'm going to turn it over to Winnie to give a little bit more description.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. If you are wondering why it seems like everyone who gets up to speak, not me, right? But everyone who gets up to speak today sounds so good and is so good at public speaking, it's because it is an inhabitation of their authentic voice. It's because you all and our online attendees have facilitated a space where all of us can step into our true voice. I think the exhaustion comes from the posturing, from the presenting of a certain version of ourselves that we've had to contort to survive things like graduate school, right? So I really try to inhabit the word imagination because I'm a firm believer that graduate school killed my imagination for about a decade because I was pouring in other people's words. I was pouring in a language structure that was colonizing myself. And I had to contort and bend and do all the things. We had to become gymnasts to survive. And so everyone here sounds so good because that's who they were. That's who they have always been, right? And thank you for facilitating this space to open up this container so that we can have these voices present in an institution of higher education. So now we ask that let's practice together, building these different containers, shaping spaces differently for our students. So the imagery here is AI generated because I was super tired. They should represent California native plants. The way in which native foliage grows is they are drought tolerant. They are well suited to survive in the environment in which they are because they're part of the environment. And so we ask you to consider, what are the first values? What are the structures on this campus that help you feel grounded, that help you feel rooted? It's hard. There's a lot of blanks on this paper. It's okay if you have blanks because that means each blank is the potential for a relationship to grow. But you have to plant that seed. You have to put that root down. You have to send out that signal, echolocate, right? Send out that signal. Beep, beep, where are you? Beep, beep, I'm a little drowning here. Please, we're going to ask our presenters to kind of disperse amongst the folks who are present in the room to share and talk story at each of the tables as people kind of try to fill in the blanks. But do not feel any kind of way if you can't fill in all the blanks, because the blanks are each other. We are each other's blanks. Right? So think about how we can grow these right relationships so that our root system is strong on this campus. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So we'll give each other about 15 minutes to work on side one, the colorful side in community. And then we'll report back a little bit. We'll have a little bit of a share out with our online attendees as well. So do not move on to the second side. You know how you tell your students, right? We are only, we're only working on the colorful side of the page right now together. And our online attendees have a PDF fillable version of this. Okay, sorry. I just want to say that we're going to give you about 5 minutes to fill it out on your own, and then our panelists will kind of join you and we'll start more conversations.